And we are recording now. My name is Jesse Ketterman. I'm with University of Maryland Extension. I'm joined by my colleague, Bonnie Braun, who she can give her introduction on slide 3 because we're going to be transitioning to her on slide 3. But I'm an extension educator in Western Maryland with a focus on financial literacy and health insurance literacy. And I've been working with this concept of resiliency and farm stress and farm family for the last several years. And I'm looking forward today to talk to you about observe, engage, share, building resilient farms and farm families. So as you can see, today's objectives: farm and farm families experience a variety of stressors that lead to disruptions on the farm. Building resilience is necessary to reduce the impact of stressors and strengthen the farm and farm families. This session will share strategies that promote resilience and identify signs of stress on the farm. And so today I'm going to kind of focus on the signs of stress piece, and my colleague Bonnie is going to be talking about resilience. And so one of the things that we want to do is introduce this concept to you called observe, engage, share. And really what we want you to do is, as you work with the agricultural population, think about the things that you observe, how you can engage, and then how you can share resources to support our agricultural community. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit more about that observe concept and introduce the engage and share, but the focus will be on observe when it comes to the signs of stress on the farm. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bonnie Braun, and she is going to take it from here.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm Bonnie Braun. I'm Professor Emerita of the Department of Family Science at the School of Public Health and a long-term extension educator and state specialist. We're going to start today by taking a look at the Stalwart family. These are some excerpts from a much longer case study that is available to you to use as part of your educational program. We want to introduce Brent and Betty Stalwart, who live on Enduring Farms, a 5th generation operation that is now a close-knit family operation. It's been going for 100 years, and over the years it has diversified. Brett grew up on the farm with his father and felt like this was his calling. His dad advised him to go off to college, which he did, and then he later married his college sweetheart, Betty. One of the things they experienced one year was that the dairy barn for their dairy operation burned to the ground due to a lightning storm. And of course, they lost the barn, the animals processing area, and it was devastating. But with insurance and income from Betty's off-the-farm job and perseverance, the family operation recovered and it went on to expand. Next. Now, they had 3 sons, and the oldest one, Andrew, graduated college, married, and began farming with his mom and dad. His wife, a veteran, runs a local farm supply store and works on the farm. Both are leaders with the Farm Bureau, and they have 2 children. Their middle son and wife chose not to farm, but their youngest one and his wife and children wanted to become part of the operation. And they worked out that they would handle on-farm repairs while he ran also his repair business. And of course, as you might imagine, this multi-generational family experienced some tensions and disagreements as they searched for how to accommodate the skills, the interests, and expectations of their family members. As Brent and Betty got older, they had concerns about how they were going to finance their health needs and how they were going to transition the farm management to the next generation. And over the multiple years, they can have continued to have their share of financial, health, and other challenges. One year, even a hurricane damaged the farm. Next. Of course, all of those changes were hard on everyone. And Brent will reminisce about sleepless nights during those hard times when he was afraid that they might even lose the farm. And he can remember having to decide in which order to pay for his farm and family's expenses. And it got so bad that he started having heart palpitations. He, of course, didn't much want to go see a doctor, but Betty pressed him and he eventually went. His high blood pressure was managed with medication, and he was given suggestions for ways to take better care of himself. At one point, however, he was hospitalized during the fall harvest operation, and he decided it might be time to let go of some of those farm responsibilities. When COVID came, it impacted their chicken operation, their repair business, their off-farm employment, and their children or grandchildren's schooling. They sought advice from Extension and other professionals, and they remain hopeful that circumstances will change for the better. Next. Now I'd like for you to think about some rough times or a rough time in your life. Now you don't have to share it. This is just private. Just get your mind centered a bit on that rough patch that you might have gone through or maybe are going through now. And I want you to answer the question in your own head. What does stress look and feel like to you? Think about how you recognize it. When do you know it, that you're going through stress? And as you have gone or are going through it, what are some things that you did do or are doing that have helped you get through stressful times? And finally, think about one or two qualities or traits that were helpful to you to be resilient, to help you get through these difficult times. Traits or qualities you think you personally possess that have helped you. Now, with the Stalwart family in mind and your own personal experience in mind, let's explore a little bit further about stressors and their impact. Next. So here we have provided 3 different definitions of what is stress, and there's probably as many more out there as what we have chosen, but it is a physiological response to some kind of challenge or demand on your personal system. And farms experience stress on farming systems. It is sometimes a feeling of being absolutely overwhelmed, unable to cope, and there's degrees of pressure, mental and emotional, that you may experience. And it is, as I've said, not only psychological, but also physical. And anything that seems to be a threat to a system affects it physically, emotionally. It could be financial well-being, simply the need to try to survive. These and many other words could describe what stress is. Next. It is, for farmers and farm families, constantly something, as one of the women we interviewed said. As we've looked at the literature to try to understand what are the sources of stress for farmers, we've divided them into 2 categories: ordinary stressors and extraordinary. Ordinary stressors are also experienced by non-farmers. They have to do with your own personal health, growth, development, family relations, child and elder care, household financial management, stability. But then you start to get things coming in here: weather, off-farm employment, machinery breakdown that does constantly seem to be an ordinary stressor. And then bottom line for most farmers is this desire to build or maintain a legacy, and it's constantly there. Extraordinary stressors are these things that come along periodically that can be so very disruptive. Certainly what we are just seeing over in the 5-state area, and particularly in Kentucky, as this extreme tornado moved through, is one of those kinds of weather events. The climate change is having an effect, not only with these kinds of events, but simply on things such as on the Eastern Shore, the salt rising into what had been fresh water and how that affects farm operations. We've seen a number of volatile and declining markets over the years, tariffs put on products, interest rates changing, debt growing, public policy and regulations that come along that have an effect, and of course, major illness and injury. And then what we've learned a lot about over the last year and a half, COVID disruptions that came at one point in time and continue to linger. So the difference here, ordinary and extraordinary. Moving on. In addition to those things, there are some cultural considerations that have an impact on who's doing the farming operation. We know from the literature that the loss of land and the loss of being a farmer is the loss of identity, and it is one of the most feared things that puts pressure on farmers and farm families. This pressure not to let others down in the family or the ancestors or the future generations. Also, we just plain know that farming can be a stressful environment. It can be isolating. It can mean long work days and sometimes a lot of loss of control over the cost or the prices and the inputs of things. One thing not often talked about is the gender and race of a farmer or farming family. There is a bias, a gender and racial bias that has an effect on how women as farmers and how minorities as farmers are perceived and treated in the community and in policies. And we also know that as a culture, this independence and self-reliance is a big value of a lot of farmers, but it also can become a source of stress if it's all bottled up and contained. And finally, we know from the research that personal health, whether it's physical or mental, emotional, social health, may not be the top priority for many farmers, and they put off getting care that they need early enough. So these are some of the background or cultural considerations that affect stress and stressors. Next. We've chosen a visual here to try to help represent this. If the wagon with that's the hay wagon there represents the infrastructure of the farm or the infrastructure of a family and a person themselves, it usually starts out fairly strong. And then the hay bales representing the stressors start getting added to that structure. Sometimes you're carrying a very, very heavy load of stressors. It's not just having one, it's sometimes the multiple effects of how many stressors are piled on and over time, to the point that for some, they just can't carry that load anymore and it collapses. As the next slide will show, there is an actual explanation for this. It's called the general adaptive syndrome. It was recognized as how our stress response system defends and then fatigues from stress. So with a scale of stress resistance of low to high, this visual starts out with a moderate level of stress. Stressor occurs. Now, this is not usually just one. It might be an extraordinary one, but it could also be stressors that occur. And you get alarmed. You mobilize to try to somehow respond to this. Your body has a resistance to this that it tries to handle and manage and cope with. But over time, depending on the strength of this, your system gets overwhelmed. And even your family system, your support system, the farming system can get overwhelmed and exhaustion sets in and your reserves are depleted. And that's when it's often time for others to help you and to help you get through this. Of course, the ideal goal is to try to prevent as much as you can by having a buildup of what we call resilience. Next. We know that stress is this part of everyday life, and it is important and it's necessary to learn how to manage that stress so you don't get into that fatigue. But it's not sufficient. We believe that what we must be doing is building resilience to reduce risk associated with stressors and to prevent those if at all possible. Again, that means we need to be building a reserve of resilience. To do that, next, We need to practice what we call resilience thinking. It's having a mindset individually or as a family or as a whole farming system or even a community that thinks about the ability to anticipate and what could come up. Could that machinery break down? If I took time today to prevent that, would that reduce stress later on? Is an example of anticipating a fairly common stressor. And then to work through these disruptions and disturbances and those stressors so that you can spur renewal. You can come back, come through and apply innovative thinking. And we certainly have a number of examples of where there were, this was applied as farmers came through this initial COVID impact and pivoted to handling things in a different way. Next. We want to get in briefly to characteristics of resilience and resilient skills. Earlier, I asked you to think about how you've gotten through some tough times. Excuse me. Maybe some of these words under characteristics apply to you. Maybe you were adaptable when this came along, or you turned to others and got some help. Maybe you were able to bounce back or even bounce forward to improve the situation. There are multiple skills to being resilient, and I've listed some of these here. Sometimes when I am talking with folks like you, they often say, oh, I don't know enough about this to be able to help. Well, yes, I think you do. Look here at what is listed here under resilient skills. Helping people to integrate change, helping them to communicate, to organize, to solve problems. Those are things that most of you already do. Help people to learn from their experiences and to practice being healthy and healthy coping strategies. These are things you can work in to your programming, and Jesse's going to talk about how to observe, listen, and share. Moving on. There's a whole body of literature about traits of resilient individuals. And these are some of the top traits that are found in that literature. In other words, you don't go it alone, though you have that often built-in self-reliance, independence nature. You have learned how to be connected to others and for many, a higher power, how to be flexible, how to access resources. And one of the things that farmers are often known for is their hardiness and hopefulness. You know, the sun will come out tomorrow. We'll get through this. So this is briefly some of the top traits of resilient individuals. Let's take a look at resilient families next. Resilient families have a commitment to one another, a connectedness. They communicate. Excuse me. They feel a sense of cohesion. They respect each other. They spend time together. These are things that you can identify and see in a resilient family. They can also be built and developed over time. Next. Jesse, take it away and help us to observe.
Thank you, Bonnie. And so if you recall, at the beginning, I introduced this concept of observe, engage, share. And these are things that we can do to engage our agricultural community around this farm stress topic. And so today I'm going to focus on observe. And I'm going to start with a question, and we'll see what responses we get in the chat box. What are things that you may see when you engage with the agricultural community that might show signs that there is farm stress? So what are some of those things that you may see when you work with a farmer or someone in the agricultural community that may say, wait a minute, something might be going on here? So let's see what kind of responses we get in the chat box before we kind of to dive into this a little bit. Yeah, so short temper, right? Very good. Yeah, I'll just kind of share when they're put in the chat box so we can all know what's going on in case some of you are on a cell phone or something. Short temper. Let's see if we can get a couple others here. I kind of gave you a hint on some categories on the screen here, right? I'm going to dive into these 4 categories. Change in work ethic, right? Yep. Change in work ethic. Good example. Yeah. Someone's approach to work kind of radically shifted from one approach to another. Someone that is known for telling jokes and engaging, and all of a sudden they stop telling jokes and are a little more withdrawn. Yeah, those are definitely some signs there. Let's see if we can get one more, and then we'll jump into my list. When your most exciting employee becomes silent, right? So a change in behavior there, absolutely. So let's jump into my list here. So, again, what does stress look like? What does it feel like? We're going to talk about it in 4 categories. We're going to talk about physical and mental. We're going to look at emotional and behavioral. We're going to look at social and relational. And then we're also going to look at environmental. So we're just going to come up with some signs that there may be stress in each of these areas. And so when you think about physical and mental signs, these are signs associated with the individual. In some cases, they are seen, or the individual may share them in conversation, right? So someone may be experiencing headaches or muscle aches, and that may be something that you see or don't see, right? Eating problems, they may have trouble sleeping, frequent sickness. So again, someone that, stays relatively healthy, all of a sudden is frequently sick. Digestive issues, high blood pressure is a great example of stress. We often see someone's blood pressure increase. They may seem exhausted or suffer memory loss. You may see it in a lack of concentration or difficulty with making decisions. So these are all, again, signs that are associated within the individual. They could be physical or they could be mental, but they are definitely things that can be seen or maybe shared with you that they're dealing with. Now let's jump into emotional and behavioral signs. And so these are a reaction to the environment, right? So these signs tend to be more expressive in nature. You may see changes in mood, someone being sad or experiencing a lot of sadness or even depression. They may be easily angered or irritable, anxiety. They may have a loss of spirit or a loss of humor. That was an example that we shared earlier. Kind of a numbness to what's going on around them. May see changes in activity level. Someone that's typically very engaged and active may not be showing up at things anymore. We talked about eating habits earlier. You may see a use of substances, right? Whether that's alcohol or drugs. They may have trouble relaxing or sleeping, poor work performance, difficulty maintaining a life balance, and a loss of interest in things that they typically enjoy doing. So again, that change in behavior is another way to kind of notice someone's experiencing farm stress. On social and relational, stress can be seen in relationships we have with other, or in some cases, the lack of relationships or the change in relationships we have with others. And so someone you've always heard from or talked to, all of a sudden you're not hearing from them anymore. So there's a decrease in communication. Or your conversations become conflicts easily, right? Which hasn't been typical in your past interactions with this individual. You do see it in strained relationships, especially when it comes to marital issues, or it can be issues within the family. And then there could be verbal or physical abuse. So those are relational signs that you may see or observe on the farm. Oops, something happened there. All right, we're back. Environmental signs, signs that can be seen both on the individual and the farm. So individual appearance, somebody who normally dresses in one style, you may notice, hey, they're not as sharp or as crisp as they used to be, or all of a sudden they're not combing their hair anymore. Disorganized or not prepared. So someone that typically comes to meetings prepared, well organized, all of a sudden they're not, or they miss meetings. You can see changes in care of the fields, right? And so fields that have normally been taken care of are no longer being taken care of. We talked about those ordinary stressors of equipment disrepair, but in this case, we're talking about, the equipment's in disrepair, but they're not fixing it. They don't care about fixing it. I'm not even going to deal with that. I just don't have the energy to do it. Or you may see that in neglect of animals as well. So those are some of the environmental signs that you may experience or observe. And so what happens with prolonged stress, right? Signs of chronic and prolonged stress. This is when, Bonnie had mentioned that general adaptation syndrome, you get to that point of exhaustion. And so you have that change of routine, the change in physical appearance. These are all things that we talked about already, but again, this is at the point where it's chronic and it's prolonged. That change in mood, whether that's depression, anxiety, despair, suicide. We didn't really talk too much about this, but we may see more farm accidents or injuries, right? Being things occurring because they're not focusing and paying attention to what they're doing, or they're not taking care of the equipment. As a result of not taking care of it, there's a likelihood of more accidents and injuries. The appearance of the farm, the care of the livestock, not making good decisions. You may start to see chronic health problems, and you saw that in the Stalwart case study that Bonnie shared there at the beginning, when he was having the heart palpitations, right? So that's, again, a sign of prolonged stress. You may start to see opioid misuse, addiction, overdose. Again, that's that whole substance abuse issue we talked about. And again, that can be abuse of illegal drugs, or it can be abuse of prescriptions that someone has. So it could fall into either one of those categories. Another challenging one for the farming population is social isolation, because you're naturally isolated to some extent when you are working on the farm. But again, I think we could see where someone who has isolated themselves even more than their typical behavior. When you go visit someone on the farm and they typically have long conversations with you, all of a sudden they're more reserved, or they don't invite you out to the farm, again, trying to isolate themselves because they just don't know how to deal with the problems they're experiencing. Not taking care of themselves, so postponing preventive care, and you can even see it in the kids, right? When things aren't right in the household or on the farm, you're going to see that in the behavior of the kids as well. So those are all signs of chronic and prolonged stress. So what are some ways to deal with stress? And there are some short-term strategies here that you can think about, and deep breathing is one of those things. Meditation, self-talk, relaxing your muscles, listening to music. Those are all kind of examples. And I think you look over at the box, you can see that deep breathing exercise. So if you kind of sit back in your chair for a minute, and you take that deep breath in and you hold it, and then you blow it out and get rid of that negative energy there. And then you repeat it, going back in, breathing it in, holding, count to 4, relax. Again, that's a short-term strategy. You can kind of just clear up your mind, give you the ability to focus a little bit, and let you relax. And you can do this anywhere, right? You can do this as we're talking in this webinar today. I often do it when I'm driving down the road, right? When I'm thinking about different things, it's like sometimes I need to take a break and just think about nothing and focus on breathing. But these are all some short-term strategies that you can use to help, again, clear your mind and handle some of the stressors that you're experiencing in your life. Can you think of other things that you do to help deal with some of that stress? Again, we're looking at short-term strategies, but we all have some things we do to deal with stress. So let's see what some of the responses might be in the chat box of strategies people use to deal with stress. Looking for a few responses in the chat box of ways that you deal with stress. What are some strategies that you can employ? And you can just, again, say you're using some of them that I mentioned here on the screen, or come up with your own. Sometimes you need to vent with others, right? So letting that out, right? And instead of building and holding it in, venting to others. And that, when we talk about resilience, we're going to talk about that connectedness to others. Yes, a nice warm bath. For some of you, that might be having some candles there around that bathtub, right? And just kind of puts you in a different place. Meditate, yes, absolutely. Meditation, we talked about that. Kind of, again, engaging in something different, right? So whether it's going to the gym or doing a project that you're interested in, cleaning your home, treating yourself to a nice meal, yeah, just doing something different to get your mind off of the stressor, whatever it is you're experiencing. Mowing the grass, yep, those are all good examples, and I thank you for sharing those examples. Now let's talk about some ways to handle long-term stress. And so we kind of touched on some of these, but there's that connection to others in your social network, right? There's just something therapeutic about being able to share your frustrations, share what's on your mind with others. And in some cases, that also allows you to develop solutions, right? By connecting to others, you may be able to find not just the ability to kind of talk through your stress, but you may be able to find some solutions to that. Exercise, when we talk about exercise and long-term health, we're talking about exercising on a regular basis. We know that exercise can reduce blood pressure and other factors, and so that other things that would keep you healthy. When you talk about healthy, again, eating, how you eat and what you eat are factors. And I think we've all kind of seen or done this ourselves. When we are stressed, we have a tendency to initially eat bad, right? Which again is counterproductive. So thinking about eating and staying healthy, and also included in staying healthy is, when you're not feeling well, making sure that you're going to the doctor and getting treated for whatever you may be experiencing, right? So staying healthy, again, keeps a clear mind and allows you to work through stressful situations. Sticking with your routine and finding practical ways to relax, all ways to handle long-term stress. And we always need to keep in mind that sometimes things are beyond our control and that we need to seek experienced doctors or mental health professionals. And so always keep that in mind, that whether it's individually that we're trying to deal with something, or whether we're seeing some all those signs we talked about in someone else, sometimes we need to recommend either to yourself or recommend to someone else, hey, you need to go talk to someone that knows a little bit more about this than I do. So those are all strategies to handle long-term stress. And now we're going to jump back to how do we build resilience. And so we have this concept of resiliency thinking, and resiliency thinking is the ability to anticipate, right? Knowing what we might be experiencing and use that to spur innovative thinking. And so to do that, you need to make sure that you can create realistic plans, right? And you can reframe your problems, not look at the negative side of it, but looking at the ability to reframe and think positively. Being able to know what resources are out there and using them effectively. And of course, I'm always going to talk about reaching out to your local extension office, seeking out new information, and then again, that connectedness of identifying individuals and organizations who can provide support. Continuing with that concept of how do we build resilience, those abilities include carrying out those plans. So not only just thinking about a plan, but coming up with the steps to carry out that plan. Always remembering that you need to manage your feelings and impulses, right? You don't want to explode and not deal effectively with your emotions and unleash that on other people. Making sure that you focus on your communication skills and connecting with others, knowing that you have the ability to do things. So the confidence in your strength and abilities, using problem solving skills, and then always working for a higher purpose, right? So again, it's that maintaining a positive outlook is a skill that can be used to build resilience. And a good example here of resiliency thinking is that concept of rubber bands. And we have these rubber bands on these two fingers, and if you pull them out and stretch them, you have that stress that's building up, but you also have to bring it back in. And so that ability to be flexible, to expand and contract are also important when it comes to your resiliency. And so now I want to introduce a tool that was developed by my colleague, Maria Papitas, and I'm going to put it in the chat box. It'll be sent out later. Let me do this. And I believe Bonnie was also involved in creating this as well, but I just placed it there in the chat box. And this is titled the Managing Farm and Farm Family Challenges Resiliently, a workshop to explore resilient thinking and doing. And so I'm not going to dig real deep into this, but I do want to introduce it to you. I've shared the tool. It's a tool that you can use and walk through, and you can share it with others. But it all begins with my next slide here. You know, again, what are you trying to address and your ability to dream? So what is it you got to think through? What am I trying to accomplish? And, you know, and then you have to think about as well, what are the challenges that go along with this? So what are the things that you're going to need to overcome? This is my dream. This is my challenge. And when you think about, when we talked about resiliency, that the ability to develop a plan, this is essentially a tool to develop that plan and to think through the different aspects of that plan. So again, what is it that you dream about, or what challenge are you trying to address? And then what are the challenges associated with it? What are you going to have to do to deal with it, to overcome that? And then we move into trying to develop a shared belief system. And so when you do that, you're looking at your behaviors, goals, and plans, but again, the concept of shared, right? You got to get people to work with you on that. And that may be your family, it may be the other people that work with you, but you have to have a shared belief system. And some of the reflection questions that go along with that include, what does this challenge mean to me or us? When you're talking about your family, is the challenge a threat or an opportunity? How and why? What strengths do I and my family members bring to addressing this challenge? And so again, focusing on the positive. What are the strengths? What do you bring to the table? What do other family members, or what are your friends, what can they bring to the table to help you with this challenge or dream that you have? You have to have that can-do attitude. You got to have support. And again, you got to remain hopeful and optimistic. So those are the concepts that go along with the shared belief system. Then you need to be aware of organizational processes and strategies. So what is out there to help you with this dream that you have? So what resources do we have or can we acquire? What does moving forward and providing mutual support look like? Which people in our community can provide that support? Are there risk management strategies that can be put in place? What strategies can we put in place to enhance the financial security and the balance of work and life? And what roles do we need to play, right, to address this? What roles or which rules need to be adjusted to help address this challenge? And then moving from the organizational processes, we got to go back to that communication and problem solving again. So those concepts of communication and problem solving is a part of resiliency. This is a tool that helps us come up with a plan. So what can we do to support clear and consistent information sharing? What can we do to provide an environment open to sharing our values? What can we learn from previous setbacks? So again, when you think about the Stalwart case study, they experienced that barn burning down. And what did we learn from that? How can we overcome future obstacles because we experienced that particular situations? What new ideas and resources can be brainstormed that can help us reach our dream? And then what process can we put in place to share decision making? So how do we get others involved in our decision making so we're not trying to go through this alone? And once you've gathered all that information, you have everything in place you need to develop some steps to move it forward. And so when you come up with some short-term steps, you can use this worksheet, write them down, and you can also figure out who can help you with that step. And sometimes that can be someone that is helping you with that particular step. Sometimes it's who can be my cheerleader or my support in achieving that particular step. And sometimes that's going to change depending upon what step you're on. But again, when you think about this, you're thinking about creating an action plan that you can hold yourself accountable to move it forward. In many ways, this worksheet is similar to a concept called SMART goals. And it's a strategy for making sure that when you develop goals, they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're time bound. So making sure your steps are specific and are in that SMART concept are important. And so we like to throw this question out. We've introduced this tool. I didn't go into it in real great detail, or I'd have provided, I'd have applied this to our case study. But now that you've reviewed the tool, think about a situation that you've identified, that situation you identified there at the beginning, that stressful situation you experienced. Would this tool have been helpful to address your particular stressor that you were experiencing? So we'll see. It's kind of like a reflection question. If you want to post something in the chat box, you can, but I'm going to kind of keep us moving forward. But I just want you to kind of reflect for a minute and say, okay, at the beginning, Bonnie shared, think about a stressor you experienced. We talked about the Stalwart case study. Could this tool have been helpful in their particular situation to help overcome that stress? And so I do want to open it up to any questions about the tool, about signs of stress, and about resiliency. And then I'm going to jump back into our observe, engage, share. So before I jump into engage and share, and I'm just introducing the concepts today, we'll be working on other presentations where we'll go in depth about engaging and sharing, but we do want to take any questions you have at this point around the signs of stress and resiliency. And you can type them in the chat box. You can unmute if you have the ability. Like I said, I do have a few more slides that I'm going to cover. So we'll see what questions come up in the chat box as I introduce these other concepts that I talked about. So with engage, just to kind of, I want to, since we introduced this concept, talk to you briefly about what engage is. And so if you are working with a farmer or someone in the ag service environment, you're going to see those signs. And when you see those signs, what do you need to do? The next step is to engage them. And when you engage with someone, you really want to validate their feelings, show empathy for them, listen to them, and then offer support. And so we have a whole presentation that focuses just on how you would engage someone that is experiencing stressors and how you might get to that point of providing them with resources. But the concept is, first you observe, second you engage, and once you've engaged with them, you can share resources. And there are different types of resources out there depending upon someone's particular situation. And when Shannon shares this slideshow out, you're going to see this slide. This is, this is a business card that we've developed. If you're interested in getting copies of this business card, you can email me or Shannon, and we can get some of them made and sent to you. But really, it sends people to our Farm Family website, our Farm Stress website, which is go.umd.edu/farmfamily. There are national resources out there. So when you're dealing with stress, especially when stress becomes overwhelming and someone is contemplating suicide, knowing what resources out there are important. And so you have that crisis text line. You see that the second one there, that's 741-741. Again, someone you're going to engage with automatically. It's a 24-hour thing. The same with the suicide prevention lifeline. And, you can see the number there is 1-800-273-TALK 8255. There are some other resources there. There's also the resource line, which is 211. You could dial 211, and that'll connect you to resources in your local community, a variety of resources, not just mental health resources. But those are all resources on the national level. If you're from Maryland, we have a couple resources here, specifically to Maryland. Of course, your local extension office is one of those resources. And then we also pulled together some financial resources for you. And I know one of the sessions here is going to talk a little bit more about, in this series, is going to talk a little bit more about financial resources. We also have ag law resources. And then, of course, we want to thank our funders for pulling this together. And I know that Shannon has provided an evaluation. If you could click on the link in the chat box for the evaluation, we would appreciate that. Of course, I didn't introduce Shannon, but Shannon is the one that has coordinated this series and probably is going to want to tell you about the next session that's coming up. We're going to put her on the spot there, but we do have a session next Monday, and if Shannon wants to introduce that, feel free. And again, we're still, if anyone has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat box or even unmute. Bonnie, I don't know, I see you're there. You've clicked your video again, so if you have any final thoughts you want to share, feel free to do so. We do thank everyone for joining us today. And we will stop the recording